There's going to be times when you don't have someone who can come with you to an event, so it's time to learn how to do cons solo, even if you don't want to. Hi, I'm Macy and I'm the artist and designer behind Mualcaina, a small business focused on kawaii merch. I've vended at 32 events so far, some of my largest being Anime Expo, Fanime, and LA Comic Con. This will primarily focus on cons further in distance, such as out of state or far enough, such as going from SoCal to NorCal, and vice versa, since cons can be a little bit more manageable solo. First off, let's start with getting to the con. Now there's multiple ways such as driving, flying, taking the train. However, I'm going to discuss driving and flying since it's the most common. Here's the general pros and cons of flying solo. Pros: less time wasted. You can cut the time it takes to drive by flying to your destination, so you can spend less on hotel if you need to by flying day of, instead of taking time off work to drive a day or two before an event. For some, it's not as exhausting. You don't have to be attentive when flying as when you're behind the wheel, and you can take naps on your flight. Now some cons. Flying is more expensive than driving. The ticket can be hundreds if not thousands of dollars versus maybe a couple hundred on gas for driving. Second, you can't bring much inventory unless you ship your products. Typically, you are limited to 2 checked baggages and 1 personal item and 1 carry-on per person, and you can only bring so much with you. It can also be a hassle going through TSA. For your carry-on items, you're limited to what you're allowed to bring through TSA, and you can expect to be searched, so definitely factor in an extra 30 minutes. There's also a possibility of losing your checked baggages, especially if you have multiple layovers. And if you do have all of your items, you have to be able to physically carry everything throughout the airport. I nearly cried when I was in Chicago because I could barely push all of my luggages throughout the airport, and the entire experience was just so frustrating by myself. Now let's move on to the pros and cons of driving. Some pros. There is space for more inventory as you're not limited to a few suitcases. It's also more affordable, and most importantly, you have the freedom to drive wherever you want and are not limited to public transportation or expensive ride shares at the con. Now some cons. It is a longer travel time, and it can be exhausting, and you will have to find rest stops in between for gas and food, and to take naps if necessary. You might even need to book a hotel if the distance is very long so you can get some rest in between. With those in mind, I'm not going to tell you which method of transportation is best, but those should give you some insight on which one might be best for you. I personally like to do a mix of both depending on how far the con is. If you've driven or flown to a convention, do you have a preference? Comment that down below and I'd love to see your input. So some tips on flying and driving. When it comes to flying to cons, find a hotel near the convention as well as a grocery store for food. It's also best if the hotel has a fridge so you can keep food there to save on costs. Also, understand your physical limits. You might be able to bring 2 checked baggages, 1 personal item, and 1 carry-on, but can you carry them around? If you want to bring a lot of items but can't physically carry them, consider shipping products to your hotel or at the convention venue. Now, I haven't done this before, but I have heard of some artists shipping products 2 weeks in advance to their hotel, but just make sure you call the hotel if you are able to do that, since some of them may charge you if you ship a certain amount, or may have limits on package weight. As for shipping to the con itself, typically this is reserved for exhibitors rather than artists and artist alley. At the airport, you can also volunteer to check in your bag at the gate, so it's one less thing to carry when you land, and you at least don't have to pay for it compared to if you do that when checking in for your flight. Now some tips for driving. Know your personal limits. I personally am only willing to drive 5 to 6 hours max, and anything longer I would much rather fly. I also recommend bookmarking gas stations and rest stops and food places that are along the way before you drive. This is so you're not searching for them while you're driving because it's not safe. Let's not do that. Also, don't forget to track your mileage, especially for taxes. I like to write down my miles as well as use the QuickBooks app to track my mileage. And before you leave, pack some food and water and keep it within arm's distance. Maybe just put it in the passenger seat so you don't have to look down to grab something while you're driving. Now let's talk about what to do during the convention. Definitely arrive early. If there are any issues, it's best to deal with them now rather than later and have the added stress of dealing things with yourself on top of all of that. Also, be friendly with your table neighbors, and this should be a given, not necessarily just when you're doing cons solo. You can ask them if they can watch your table while you leave to go to the restroom, and some events you might be able to ask staff to watch your stuff, though it's not as common. Locate your closest restrooms. I try to use it several times before the con starts and just take sips of water during the event so I don't feel the need to use it while also not feeling dehydrated. You can also make a sign saying that you'll go to the restroom, and some people will also cover their display a bit if it's a self-serve model just to prevent quick theft. Just make sure to bring your cash with you, which is also why I like to have my cash in a fanny pack rather than in a cash box since it's easier to transport with me. And this is more so for female artists, but don't openly tell people that you're by yourself, especially to attendees and people that you don't know. And also don't post about it on social media. In this case, it's okay to lie. Just say you're with a friend or a family member who's walking around, because when it comes to your safety, you can lie. Openly publicizing that you're by yourself can be dangerous because some might take advantage of the fact that you're there alone and wait until the end of the con to follow you to your car or hotel. Also, make sure you bring plenty of snacks and water so you don't have to leave your table. Again, don't chug your drinks or else you're going to have to take several restroom breaks. You can also make use of delivery apps, especially if you don't have a car. Some can deliver to the front doors of the convention and you may be able to pick it up from them then. Now that the con is over or nearly over, give yourself extra time to take down your setup. Now it depends on your setup, and I feel like a lot of other people's setups are easier than mine. However, it usually only takes about 40 minutes for me to take down if I have other people with me, but when I'm by myself, it'll take about 2 hours. It is important to allot a good amount of time in between, especially if you have to go back and forth to your car or wait for a rideshare to go to the airport. If you can afford it and you have the time to do so, consider flying or driving back home the next day so you're not as stressed or exhausted. I would have done that for ASIN when I was in Chicago, but I did have Fanime the following weekend, and I really needed to fly home to prep for that convention. And it kind of sucks because I was talking about this with another person who was at ASIN, and I probably lost out on a few $1,000s just by not staying the extra 3 hours at that convention because I had to leave at 2 p.m. to catch my flight, which was around 5 or so, but the convention ended at 5, so I definitely lost out on 3 hours because even while I was taking down my display, there were a few people who asked me if I was still taking sales, and I did not, which really sucks, but it's okay. I'll just have to try to get in next year. Ideally, I would like to have at least one other person with me, even if a con isn't busy, because I do like having the option to walk around. Anime Expo is probably the only convention I would never run solo because of how hectic it is. And again, I would like to have the option to walk around and actually enjoy the convention outside of Artist Alley, which is why I always have 2 helpers for that event so we can rotate out and all enjoy AX as well. If you're curious about my first experience doing an out-of-state con solo, watch this vlog during my time vending at Anime Central in Chicago. See you in the next video!